everybody, to Breakthrough Souls. On today's show, I have Lauren Monack. Lauren worked for 23 years preserving open spaces in the San Francisco Bay Area. Then she switched to life coaching, and she's has multiple certifications, and she's done that for 6 years. Most recently, Lauren has become a ceramics artist and as well as a water painter. But most importantly, Lauren Monack is my sister. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you, bro.
You are welcome. And today we're going to talk about kind of a heavy topic. And I didn't tell you about this earlier, but one of my videos that is the most watched is with Alex Kane. He's my yoga instructor. And during my interview with him, we talked about death, dying, and grieving. And that actually got
Mm.
the most amount of hits than any other interview that I've done. And so I think this is an important topic. I've also talked to some of my friends who are going through, perhaps their parents are getting older and going through the dying process. And we both did that with both of our parents pretty much back to back. And we wanted to talk about what we learned. So, and kind of the format here we're going to do for everybody is my sister, when she was at the doing open space work for 23 years, you were like the chief operating officer, and you have more of an administrative mind than I do. So you have a lot of detail that I can't remember. And I think, us discussing this, I hope will be helpful for people. So thanks for joining me, Laura.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That's a really good
Yeah,
conversation, I think.
I do too. And so, it's like, where do we start here? And if we're just talking to people who are, going through this, you're not alone. It's going to happen to so many people, where all of a sudden your parents are older, or maybe they got sick and they're not, not as old as they should be to be going through the dying process. But here we are. And I would also say that, relationships aren't always easy with the parents. So, and for you, Laura, and for me as well, but from your perspective, what's kind of your relationship with our parents, which they were divorced, and I think sometimes there was some ups and downs, and then somehow we got to a place where we could be with our parents again, so to speak. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about kind of your journey to getting to the place where you felt like, hey, I need to take care of my parents regardless of maybe what happened in the past?
Yeah, I mean, this is big, this is a lot.
This is big.
So, like, mom and dad were divorced for, I think, 45 years, and they neither one remarried, and they didn't have any more children. And I'm the oldest, so um, I sort of was, because I'm an administrative one, did a lot of the kind of nuts and bolts kind of stuff for mom and dad. But my relationship with each of them was so different. With dad, um, he was kind of easy. You did a lot of work with dad. I didn't feel like I needed to jump in. I was raising children, and I lived far. I lived an hour away. Um, and it just, like, there was not enough time to spend with dad, kind of. And you sort of stepped in there. I did when you were gone, but I didn't have a hard relationship with dad. It was pretty easy with dad. Mom was, yeah, the chat for me, super challenging. Like, we were, I think, from the time that I was about 15 or so till just a few years before she passed, we were at loggerheads a lot of the time. Like, we disagreed, and we had a really difficult relationship. I don't think it was that bad until maybe I was in my mid 30s, and the things about her life weren't going as smoothly, and she wanted me to take care of her. I was like, no way. I got my hands full. And you're like, you're young still. I'm not taking care of you. Um, I don't know, it was just really difficult. There were some years I didn't even talk to her. That's how bad it got. I just wasn't gonna put up with it,
And
and
she
it was hard.
she also yeah, it was hard, and she also at one point, as I recall, because I'm the diplomat of the family, the way I see myself, where I'm like, "Hey, everybody, come on, can't we all just get along?"
Yeah.
And at one point, she wanted to disown you. You know, it's like I'm going to disown my daughter because you know you guys were at loggerheads. But mom and I can attest that mom was a handful, big time, and it wasn't easy. Like there was times where it was um, like it's like what is going on. So yes, I can attest to your difficulties, and I guess the question is, and one of the reasons why we're talking about this is you're not alone, probably, if you're listening to this, that you know it's not always easy. But how do you think you eventually got past that? You know, what do you think? And I'm sure wasn't overnight, but how were you able to repair your relationship with mom?
You know, I've thought about it a lot because there was like I've never not loved her. So, I know I share the how hard it was to be in relationship with her because I had this idea of how I thought it should be. Um, and my bad, really, because, she can't be anybody that other than who she is. So I think actually going to coaching school helped me because helps with the communication skills and empathy, and because I can be a brain in a jar. Like I can think all processes and that this isn't efficient and all that, and I can forget the people part of my world. Like it's a weakness of mine, and I'm not saying that mom wasn't. I was in the relationship. Let me just say that I was in that relationship, and in order for me to find peace with somebody I love, I needed to find a new way to do things with her, and coaching school helped me learn that. And I think there was a period of time where forgave I had to forgive her for all the things she had done, that she was currently doing, that might happen in the future, because it gave me freedom. It wasn't about like going up to her and saying, "I forgive you, mom, for being, really difficult to be with." It was an internal process of letting go and letting go and letting go. And there was a point where I just decided that I would be with her however she needed me to be with her. And that's all we could have. There was never going to be trust or a deep relationship again. But that was like freedom for me, because then I could be with her and spend time with her. And it was like like it was a spiritual journey for myself to be present for mom and how she needed to be present, and then not to take on all that. Like I just had to work hard at not taking it personally, the stuff, because it was all about stuff that wasn't working for her, and she was taking it out on me. That's what I think was happening. I didn't do the things she said I was doing. So I'm like, well, she's making up a story about that. How can I love her anyway? So that was my sort of my
Yes,
process, was going through that.
and I would, like to add to that as part of my spiritual awakening is I hate to say that. I probably say that every time that I hate to say that because I don't know if that's the right word. But forgiveness is part of healing, right? And it's not saying that whatever somebody else has done to you or your perception of what they have done to you, it's not like you're saying it's okay. It's just that you're not letting it control you anymore. Is how I
Yeah.
had also processed forgiveness, where it's like and like you said, just let the person be. And we're trying to be in a relationship with mom because we love mom, although she had her hard times and she had her traumas growing up too. Um, and the more I felt like I could kind of distance myself from the emotional aspect of her behavior and forgive and then heal myself, the more I could kind of see um, her generational traumas, so to speak, which made it even more helpful for me to heal too. I
Hmm.
don't know if does that resonate for you too?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot going on. Like and it wasn't like I didn't take responsibility for my own crappy behavior, because it was on both sides. I did some things. I was immature and I made some choices and I said some things and I behaved in a way that wasn't like who I really want to be. But I couldn't do that until I had just grown up some. I just had to grow up and get over it and hurt the pain of like our relationship shredding over and over and over again. Just, I couldn't live like that. And I had to really get clean with myself about that. Like, at times we would have fights and I would just be mean. I, I can be mean. And I had to apologize for all of it. You know, I can be mean.
Yes, I do know big. Yeah, I mean,
but,
come on. I mean,
but the,
we are definitely kind of the traditional brother sister where we're pretty close, except for we have our differences where we can fight like we're children again. It's like, and we're still trying to go through probably some type of maturity process.
hey,
But
you
no,
know
I
what?
think,
We're really good at it. We're really good at calling each other out, but also taking responsibility and like our
yeah,
both of our work around all this stuff has showed up amazingly. I think it's why we could do what we did for mom and dad.
yeah, we haven't, even though I think in our family, we've had dysfunctional relationship, we all haven't given up on each other. Even mom, when she was upset with you and claiming she was going to disown you, which I just found absurd at the time, but I'm sure she had she was frustrated. She always had a picture of you in her house. And it's like always, she also never gave up, I think. But we all had the desire to figure out how to make it work, even if it wasn't going to be perfect. So I do want to say,
Yeah.
great job, Laura. I mean, for not giving up. And, I know you've gone through a lot. And so, forgiveness is part of it, and realizing, hey, I think I could grow and maybe take some responsibility. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Same with you. We didn't,
Yeah.
I felt like it was an honor for us to be able to be in the space of someone who is passing from one place to another, um, and doing it together. I think that was really great. And I don't think we could have done it if we hadn't done a lot of work around forgiveness.
Yes, and I'll add that I did, for me, my therapy was doing psilocybin plant medicine, as people know from this channel. But also, I did the same. I went to the same coaching institute that you did, and that was helpful because it helps to even though you're getting trained, you're also being coached, and it's letting energy flow through, which is very healing. So even if anybody's listening to this, you don't necessarily have to go through a coaching program, but life coaches, if you can get a life coach that you like, that's also helpful, just as helpful, I think, as seeing a psychologist or a psychiatrist or any other kind of therapy or doing plant medicines. I think life coaching um, can help you, because a life coach isn't there to tell you what to do. They're there to help you process your thoughts and emotions. And do you want to, better than I do, because you've done that professionally for a number of years. Can you kind of walk through, because it helped you, how it helped you, and what maybe somebody could get out of it if they're trying to process something like this, like maybe dealing with dying parents?
Yeah, it's an internal, like your client zero. So when you go to coaching school, your client zero, a good coaching school you'll be processing yourself before you do anybody else. As you should walk in the shoes of somebody you're going to be coaching. What's it going to be like? What's the experience? What I loved, you and I went to CTI. It's what's it called? It used to be called Coaches Training Institute, but
It's
what is it
Coactive
now?
Training Institute now.
Coactive Training Institute, because it's more of like leadership training, and you get lots of skills for coaching. But when you're a leader, you're also coaching people. Like a good leader will coach people. And so what I loved about CTI was that it was in person. And I know you waited to do the in person after the whole COVID shutdown thing. And I think it's really good. So you get this in person experience of walking through your, like, identifying who you are, who you want to be, what your future might look like, but also the darker shadow side of who you are, and acknowledging that it's there. It doesn't mean you have to, I mean, acknowledging that it's there doesn't mean that you're caving into it. It actually frees you when you acknowledge it, that in the like able to be make amends to people. You know, when you can see your own dark side, you go, oh shoot, how did that show up? How did that show up with my relationships that are difficult or even good? So I think that to me was instrumental when I learned this skill of conversation, communication, listening, not interrupting. Oh God, I was a terrible interrupter. My coach bought me the I'm number one foam finger thing. And she goes, I want you to keep this in your office because you're the one who's interrupting people. She bought me this huge foam finger to remind me to shut up and to listen to people. And it
That's,
makes a
that's
huge
funny
difference.
because, right. And I felt like I had the same problem being a sales manager. I wanted to listen to my clients more. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do like a coaching training, because you should be listening instead of doing all the talking. And, and it all starts within us. Like, we have to want to do that. We also have to want to take feedback when you go into coaching, right? And you said that the person said that you need to listen more. You as a, somebody getting trained needs to hear that and then also take it to heart. So that's awesome, I think, Laura.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I think you mentioned something really good that I want to make a point of is that when you do your shadow work, which is, you can call it, I'm looking at my saboteur, or this is the bad behavior. If you're doing the 12 steps, even you'll do a inventory about like how you behave badly. And when you're willing to look at that and you shine a light on it, receiving feedback then doesn't become a shock. Like those two things have to go together. They happen like they make you grow in a way that, like, okay, so I know I can overtalk you, and you and I have had conversations where we're like, I know I'm like this, and I give you permission to give me feedback. Sometimes when you go, can I give you some feedback? And I'm like, no, you
no,
cannot.
sometimes. You mean all the time? Just kidding. Here we go. Here we go. There's a little barbs, right? That's the brother sister barb. But no, you have done, yeah, you've done amazingly, and I've heard you coach my friend who agreed to do that while we were on the call. So that normally you don't do it in public, but I saw how phenomenal you are at coaching. So
Thank you.
yeah, you've come a long way, Laura.
Thanks,
Well done.
Bill.
Yeah. Right. So kind of moving on a little bit, which it's like as parents get older, because we're talking about death and dying, the fun topic, the dying parents. Um, as and our parents, like dad died at 93, and then about a year and a half later, mom died at 87. So they had lived decently long lives, um, but as they got older, I felt like the classic. I felt like they were my children to a
Hmm.
degree, right? And it's like they needed a lot of help, and they were becoming a lot more gentle and sweet, and they just needed help, right? Because you can't do it all, whether it's lifting something or going to the store or maybe going to doctor's appointments, and they can't process. I have a hard time process. I went to the doctor the other day, and he was talking so fast, like, dude, slow down. And I thought about mom and dad, how somebody just assuming they understand all the medical jargon. They have a hard time process, like just being there with them in an appointment, things like this, becomes a lot of work, but it's also bonding, right? It's like a time to go, I don't, but the time's not limited. Although it seemed to me, it's like, is this going to go on forever? Which sounds horrible. I wasn't hoping for that they died, but but you're there. It's like they needed a lot of help. Like they're now, like they raised us. Now I feel like I'd like to take care of them, but it was a lot of work. What was your experience like? I mean, was it similar where it felt like, it's like they need way more help, like almost like they're kids again, a little bit?
Oh my God, I learned so much about them through this experience because it did seem like it was going on forever. The difference between you and me is that I've had kids. So I remember when my kids were little, I felt like I was going to be changing diapers forever, or I was going to pick up socks forever, or I was going to have dirty dishes everywhere all over the house forever. Like, I'm like, when's it going to end? It's never going to end. So when you're a parent, that kind of happens. So to watch mom and dad begin declining, and mom declined way worse than dad. Mom had a long, steep decline. Dad did okay. I mean, he had a couple of incidents, but it was, I remember thinking, oh my God, this was a big deal. I remember looking at dad before mom because I was like, Bill, you got mom. I can't do it. But I was looking at dad going, so dad, I remember when dad wanted to start talking about assisted living. And so I think it was like 2010 or 2011, somewhere around there. And we were driving up to Roseville. So it's like 2.5 hours from dad lived and
And by the
looking at
way, this is
places.
10 years before he had passed away. So it was 10 years he was talking about assisted living, 10
Right.
years
And he
before he
had
actually almost went in there.
correct. And like this goes to, there's a lot of things about dad and mom and them getting older and us looking at their lives and saying they should do things differently. Like dad had how many papers? How much paperwork did dad have everywhere? Because dad was a child of the Depression and he was a pack rat. He had that pack rat thing going on. And so we were always trying to clean up his papers. And dad, you need to, like, I would call dad and go, hey, dad, what's going on? And he'd say, oh, I'm working on my papers every time. That was like my whole adulthood. It's like cleaning up my papers. Um, and so there was a point where somehow when you get older and your parents are starting to age and decline, this was my experience, that somehow I knew better. Like I knew how to run their lives better than they did. I mean, so arrogant and so much hubris in this thought. But so we were always trying to get him into assisted living because we thought that maybe where he lived he was too lonely and he was going to start to decline and he was going to need more help. And like in retrospect, it was none of my freaking business. But it interfered with how I spent time with him and how much I loved him. But that was the hardest thing, was be to let go of the thing that I thought I needed to like control it all. I thought I knew better. And letting go of that in stages, like, okay, he's just not going to do that. He's not going to move to assisted living after all the time we put in. I think it was a way for him to spend time with us, frankly. Um, once I let it go, it was easier. It was easier, but I found that was the hardest part about watching him age, was that I thought I knew better, and I thought there was decisions that I had to make, or we had to
Yeah.
make, that would
And
improve his life.
right. No, I'm with you. And it's like yeah, you just let go. But there came a time when, so mom moved herself into a senior apartment complex, which was really a good spot for her to land. She had friends around there, and we didn't have to worry as much because we knew that the people around her could watch her and like watch each other. Whereas dad he was determined to live by himself in a townhouse that had all these steps where he could barely move. And eventually, right. And then there was a lot of worry on my end, and I didn't live too far from him. And I
I
worried about
worried.
him all. Yes, I worried about him all the time. And so did you. And then he fell down and broke his back and his neck at 88 and had 8 hours of surgery and lived. And, and he bounced back pretty good. But that was the time when we kind of made the executive decision saying, you're going into assisted living, um,
That
because
was really hard.
so hard, so hard. And, it's like he couldn't move it up and down the stairs, and he didn't look like he could drive again. And so we're like, we made it temporary. We didn't force him or anything, but we did the temporary thing. and it just kind of stuck. Although I feel guilty a little bit where I know he didn't really want to, but yet he actually flourished more being in there. So there was this, and I don't like the idea of sticking, old people into it, like in the corner of the society where we just kind of ignore them and they don't have access to youth and vibrancy. There's just a bunch of old people like looking at each other dying. It's like, sure, it's convenient and makes financial sense for, you know,
If you can afford
certain,
it. I mean, thank goodness he had managed his money appropriately so he could afford it.
and
Not
there's
everybody
that
can
too.
afford it.
And yeah, he could afford it, but he also wanted to go back to living by himself. He's trying to figure out how could he do that by himself. And anyway, he ended up being okay. But I remember worrying and worrying and worrying all the time about him because he was kind of just, and he would drive when he really shouldn't be driving. And I didn't
Oh
blame him for wanting to drive, but and he got in a car accident and several car accidents, and mom too. Mom got in a bad
Don't
car
even,
accident.
that
Still
last
wanted to
one
drive.
was really bad.
So so we worried, right? We worried, and we tried to give him as much independence as possible while trying to give them a comfortable place to live and also kind of give ourselves peace of mind. Like it was this whole balance where I didn't want to tell him what to do, but at some point I can't sit there and get an ulcer over. I can't help it, but that's what I'm kind of getting an ulcer over worrying about him and mom sometimes, right?
Oh, I remember talking about that with you. And I mean, like, it was no way to live, to worry about them. But I saw you worrying so much. And I'm not a worrywart. That's not kind of how I roll. It doesn't mean I don't have concern. I just don't let it eat me up. Thank goodness. I got other problems, but that's not one of them. And I remember like the driving thing, like both of them driving. Like I just kept worrying that they were going to kill somebody, like a kid, like run someone over because they couldn't control themselves as well. Like their reflexes weren't as good. And I remember very clearly at some point, because we tried to stop the driving and we just wouldn't work. And I remember thinking, this is not, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. This isn't my business to interfere with. This isn't my life to interfere with. Like I had an epiphany at some point where dad is just going to do what dad does. And eventually he gave up the keys. He just stopped driving.
No,
Because
he
I don't
didn't.
think yes, he did. Like the last 6 months he
He
quit driving.
maybe the
His
last
car.
6 months, but he would drive like in a 1 mile radius
Oh, I know.
up until
Mhm.
just about the end.
Yeah,
But he did it as responsibly as possible, and sometimes scraped some cars, um,
I
and it
know.
made
But
me
that wasn't
nervous.
our car. It wasn't our job to keep. Same with mom. When she crashed her car and like went off the road and hit a pole. I mean, thank God she didn't. It didn't kill her
She
because
went into a
that could
ditch, and she went into a ditch, hit a pole, and
totaled her
got really
car.
bruised up
Oh,
because
I
she was
know.
driving on she got a flat tire, and she would not get the tire replaced, and so she had that spare tire that was tiny, and she was driving on like a levee practically, and it just and the car overtook her and pulled her down in the ditch, so, and
That
totaled
was
the
actually
car.
a blessing, by the way, because no one would get her another car. So she couldn't drive
Yeah.
anymore.
So it's all of this, in case anybody's going through it, it's so hard to navigate. And and I feel very thankful to have my sister, and we're pretty close in age where we could team up, and we also have different skills, right? It's like we're not the same person in that regard at all. So thank you for being there, because it's going to be us one day, right? And as we talk about, if there's somebody else that's older watching this, it's like you're probably thinking, good luck to you when you get older too. It's like so true. It's like we all are going to go through this, and we all have family that we want to lean on, and we all want to try to balance everybody's, you know, um, needs and wants and worries and all that stuff. And it's really not easy, but it can be done.
It can be done. I think we did a way better job I think at the last couple of years, maybe not. I don't think we did a way better job maybe the last year or two. Mom definitely benefited from dad's passing, what we learned from dad's passing and
And you know what? Let's
navigating
talk
the
about that.
end.
Yeah, let's talk about. We'll kind of move into, instead of like going over our PTSD and our trauma. But
Yeah, but we
you
learned
know, in
so
retrospect,
much from all that hard stuff.
so much. I mean, I wouldn't change it. And
Hey, can I say
it
something
was.
before we continue? Is that I know we're laughing and we're smiling and we're kind of joking about like what it was like. And it was really, really hard. And I couldn't have done it and I wouldn't have wanted to do it without you. And by the way, we are not typical brother and sister. I've heard enough things about enough from enough people that they don't have a great relationship with their sibling. But I am one grateful person. If if you're out there and you're experiencing this and you need to make amends to your sibling so that you can have the support, do it. Because it's a beautiful experience if you show up 100% for your parents.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
well said. Yeah, it's well said, and thank you. Agreed. Likewise, and all that stuff. Um, and it's being able to try to come and make amends and learn. It does take two people. So because it's what I mean. It's like somebody might have a more difficult relationship with somebody, but that other person does also need to come about halfway.
Oh,
And I'm
absolutely.
so glad that you and I could figure that out. Um, and yeah, it strengthened our relationship, as well as having a closer relationship with mom and dad. So it really was beautiful in the long run. And then it came time where dad um, he had some issues, like something was happening, and then all of a sudden he couldn't stand up and he needed to go to the hospital. So this was December 27th, 2019. And I took him into the hospital and he never came home. It was about a little over a month later, maybe a month and a half. And that's where you and I had never dealt with hospice before, or somebody dying. And we came together and became a team, a really good team, I think. And it was a huge learning experience. And we had to start to figure out the difference between, as I'm looking at my notes, like, what do we do? Is somebody is he dying? Is he not dying? Is he bouncing back? What does he have? Palliative care versus hospice and all this. Um, what was your memory of that time?
Like chaos. I remember he'd been sick. I mean, he'd been complaining for a long time about his stomach not feeling well. And like in June, it got really bad. And he kept going to the doctor and they couldn't find anything. I think they were poo pooing him. And we weren't you were going once in a while to his doctors, as I recall. Like, because that kind of advocacy is really important because dad couldn't explain exactly what his doctors were saying. And so I think you went a couple times and we're like,
Yeah,
well,
his
they said they
doctors were
can.
my doctors.
Yeah.
So yeah, he went to the Manoukians, who we love. It was a husband and wife team, and I went to the husband, and he went to the wife, and it was a tiny office. They don't do it like, it felt like, yeah, like if you're in the country or something, and you go to, it was beautiful. So, um, yes, I went a few times. You're right, but you remember a lot more detail about. It sounds like about his decline, and I didn't. I guess I don't think I noticed it as much as you did.
Yeah. Because I didn't see him as often because I didn't live there anymore. I think. Yeah. I had just moved away. And so I'd moved a few hours away. And um, so when I'd come and it'd be like, oh my gosh. So I remember recording him like, uh-oh. I was like, uh-oh, he's not getting younger. And he's not, he's, I remember taking him out for his birthday in August and we took him to that golf course and he had a really hard time getting in there. Like he put up with the pain of moving around because he wanted to be with us so much. And I can just remember feeling alarmed. I like, what's going on here? So I was on high alert about what was happening. So I know he went to the doctor. He went to some doctor and they said, you've got cancer, but we don't know
Well,
what
that
kind of cancer and we don't know where it is. And so he went in
yeah.
later for a colonoscopy. I love that doctor he had. He's so good. Um, and I couldn't find anything. So that was late November. That was right, remember? Because I remember you calling me and saying, Dad's got cancer, but they don't know what kind of cancer and they don't know where it is. They must have done a blood test, and all the I don't remember how, but they didn't know what he had. I remember needing to be someone who listened differently when I went to his doctor's appointments. That was the beginning of understanding what advocacy is. And I remember thinking I should have been doing this way sooner. So I understood, and that he knew that I was listening, and the doctor knew that I was listening. Like, I know you were doing it, but we weren't doing it that way. Like, as the advocate, like, oh, check following in with Dad after the meeting and saying, do you remember that we talked about this, this, and this? Because a lot of times, neither one of them would remember all the details. That's what I remember at the end, like going, oh, I should have been doing this so much
And I
sooner.
think that's a good point. I mean, you're talking because we're going to get into a little bit more detail for anybody who wants to kind of know what our process was in case it's helpful. Is advocacy. I think advocating for somebody, and we mentioned that a little bit earlier. As somebody gets older, or you're sick, maybe you're younger and you're sick and you're having a hard time processing. It's really helpful to be with somebody at a doctor's appointment, and then when he ended up um, getting to the point where he's immobile and couldn't get up and went into the hospital, that's when I kind of want to go into the hospice part. Like he went into, it was determined that he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So he had cancer in his intestines. And if he was younger, perhaps he could have had surgery and bounced back. But the doctor said that at this point, he had a few weeks left, and so we ended up at a nursing home that also could do hospice at the nursing home. But can you talk about? I'm trying to figure out where maybe a good thing to start talking about hospice is, but maybe like hospice is a verb; it's not a noun. I always thought it was a noun. That was a place, and it's a place where they take care of you until you pass away, and it's like you're on a cloud, and everybody's catering to you. It's not, right? It's a verb. It's like something that is helps you. I don't know. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Do you know what I mean? I mean, we were
Yeah.
talking about that at one point. I got confused.
Well, I think it's very common for it to be confusing and people don't get it. Like, so hospice is a service and it's free for most people. So your medical will pay for it. Um, and you can have hospice care and be anywhere. You can go to a hospice place, but that's not typical. You can have hospice come in at home, or you can have hospice come into the care facility, which is where dad was in a recovery, like I always want to call it just the plum
It was
tree.
a nursing home and a recovering facility for people who
Yeah.
had
So it's like
surgery.
where you go after surgery to recover for a few weeks and get PT, and then you go home because you can't get around. And I mean, the hospital just sent him over to Plumtree. But it wasn't, I got to say that because I was the executor of his estate. And so once Dad was out of commission, like he kept falling asleep and he was like basically in a coma for a while. And then he came to, and then I was directing all the medical care. So, I mean, not without your help, but like I was responsible for like, okay, so what's the next step and where are we going and how are we doing that? And medical records, I know we'll talk about that in a minute, but I ended up having to go, like, I had to be on deck. Like, oh, I'm in charge of somebody else's life again, second time, because when he fell down and broke his neck and back, I was on deck because he couldn't do anything, pay his bills and all the things. And so I didn't know what hospice was. Oh man, I can remember this was so hard. First of all, we didn't think he was dying. And I remember us talking to that cancer doctor and like arguing about it. Like, he's not helping Dad. And like, but he's like, no, he didn't have very good bedside manner, but he was telling us the truth. Your dad is dying. I think I don't think he was that blunt, but he's not going to make it. Or he said something like obscure enough for us to go, then we're with the wrong doctor. We have to get the right doctor. Like, we were on fire. I remember us being on fire about it. Like, we were like not giving up on our dad. And I can remember, I don't know who said it. I don't know who said that we should start talking about hospice, but we finally heard it and we started interviewing all these hospice places. And the truth was, and I think people need to hear this, that he was in this, recovering care facility. And the minute, because what hospice does, it ceases all unnecessary intervention, except for palliative care, which is the removal of pain. Palliative care is to make you comfortable, period. And that palliative care can happen in the care facility, it can happen in a hospital. It's not exclusive to hospice.
And it can happen at
So
home too.
it can happen at home.
Um,
Like lots of people get palliative care after surgery. You get some drugs. That's palliative care. Like that's it. It's not super fancy and it can get really complicated. But for somebody like dad, where it was like he was on morphine because he was in so much pain. But here I remember us having this problem. We had to do this. It was $2,000 a day to be in the care facility. And the minute we ordered hospice, the insurance wasn't going to cover it. The care facility. He would have to go home or go to a hospice place, which it barely exists. So that wasn't a possibility. So we were like, well, what do we do? Like, how long is this going to go on? It took us a while to say yes to hospice. And also thinking, like, there was this financial component. Like, what do we do? Like, how are we going to take care of dad? How are we going to make sure he's comfortable? And what does it actually mean? So we educated ourselves on the fly. And when we finally chose somebody, they came in and I mean, we waited way too long. And she's like, yeah, he's got 3 days or something. Is that what you remember? Like, it was so fast.
yeah, it was
But
whatever it was. It was, and I also want to say regarding hospice, uh, and you mentioned that as soon as you determine somebody's on hospice, then they're not doing anything to save their life. They're just dealing with the pain. But there's also some thing where the person has to be like the doctor says, we don't think they have more than a year or 2 years. So there's some time limit on it too, but it can be
right.
kind of long. And they told us that people do sometimes recover out. And even though you're in hospice, you may actually go out of hospice because, hey, you're not actually dying. So it doesn't always mean, or it doesn't always result in death, so to speak, or literally. It can result in recovery. And we kind of thought also once you went into hospice, there would be some medical
Like, it was a
insurance
death
coverage on that.
sentence. Like,
It's not
I think
necessarily a death sentence.
no. And I think one of the things I learned, because we interviewed so many different places, like we were trying to find the right place and like we educated ourselves really well, was that the nicest people in the world work for hospice and that it's a resource you cannot, you, that it was a resource I don't know if I could live without ever again. Like, they educated us. They're all the people who work for hospice want to make people who are dying comfortable, but also their families. It was very supportive of us. They were all the places we saw, all the people we talked to, were like, we want you to have comfort too. These are the services we offer you. So it's not just for the person, it's for the family. And
Yeah.
really good
I
hospice
would, I
offers
will
all those
echo.
things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say that the human beings that work for a hospice institution or organization are the nicest people in the world, like the sweetest, kindest, most empathetic, caring, but they're strong. They've seen this kind of thing before. It's the differences might be actually in the organization itself. Some organizations
Yeah.
have different policies than others, but it's the humans that work there that are angels. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, but they're just beautiful souls. And they were so and usually you don't get the same exact person coming in, but they come in and help out with the pain, and part of it is to empower us to be able to do a lot of things. They're not
They don't
there all
hang
the time.
around. they're not nurses that hang around, but they give you the tool. They gave us the tools to take care of our family member. Like they made it really clear, this person is dying and you're going to need to be on deck. Like, or you need to hire a nurse or whatever you need to do, but we don't do the work. We support you as you're doing the work. This is
And
an
but
experience like that.
right, and but they did come in. If we called them, they would come in, and they came in,
Hmm.
I think, once a day. So we're still there quite often, but they were not live-in
Right.
nurses that were helping. So,
Yeah.
in one way, I felt like they were there a lot, but in the other hand, sometimes we had to figure it out. Sometimes we were able to wait for them to get there to deal with some things,
Well,
and it worked
we're
out.
talking about dad, remember? So dad, it was like this. We hired hospice and it was within uh, 3 days he had passed away. Like we
It was
hardly had
fast.
and they were great and we hardly had an experience with them though. Like it was super fast. It
It
was
was super
like,
fast. And since we're, just kind of looking at the time and we have a couple more things to cover, why don't we talk about mom, like what we learned? So mom was, and so dad passed and it was pretty quick. And I don't know if there's anything else to add to that, but then, we were obviously in shock and grieving. And it was one he died about a month and a half before lockdown from COVID. And then I had dad's ashes on my shelf behind me for, I don't know, like 6 or 7 months before we, had his service. And I'm like, and at some point, I'm like, I think dad needs to be laid to rest. He wants to be laid to rest instead of sitting behind me watching YouTube. But, which is what I did a lot in
thank you,
COVID.
lockdown.
But thank you, lockdown. And then, and even though mom and dad were divorced for a long time, never remarried, they're somehow energetically close. And uh, mom started to decline about a year later. Or maybe she was already declining, but the next year she passed away. But she passed away in her apartment, so which was beautiful too. What do you see as the differences between the two? Like, what did we learn, and what are the differences, and your experience with mom versus dad, and your relationship was different with mom too.
Oh my gosh. So I think the thing I learned with dad was that to be present to no matter what it was, because I only had this much time. I knew it was coming. And to just sit with him or talk with him or hold him and let go of all the things I thought should happen and to be present. Just to be in the space of somebody who he was scared. I remember him being scared because he didn't know, he wanted to get better. Like he did not want to die. That's what I remember. Like when he was lucid, he's like, "Oh, what's happening?" And like I remember being alarmed because I'm like, "What am I supposed to say? Dad, you're dying. It's happening." I'm not going to say that. I'm like, "It's okay, Dad. We got you. We're here and we love you." And I just decided to sit inside I can remember so clearly. It's just saying to myself, be here and be with dad in a space of love. How can I evoke love and gratitude every minute that I'm in the presence? Because it's the only thing I can offer him as he goes through this journey of letting go. And to work with you closely about, like, I'm pointing over to the box next to me, like you're right here, you over there. Like we were on the phone all the time. We were together. I was telling you when I was coming into town and how I was going to stay. I can remember sleeping on your couch a bunch. I can remember or staying at my husband's mom's, Chris's mom. Um, Everybody came up, and I remember thinking, it's my only job is to be here with love and non-judgment and to be of service. That's I can remember. Like it makes me want to cry because it was such a beautiful way to be with dad that I didn't know that I could be that way. I thought I was going to be like a wreck, and I wasn't. I was just so sure that how I was being with dad was exactly what I needed to do, that um when he passed away I was at peace because I was there 100% for dad. And you and I did it together, like right like this. It was a beautiful experience. So what I learned from dad was to be with mom in the same way sooner. Like if dad taught me how to be with mom and all the history, I just boop, it didn't mean anything to me. It was how can I be of service and present with mom? Because she broke a hip, she'd had 2 heart attacks. Like that whole year, I remember saying to you, mom's got 6 months. I remember thinking after dad died, and I'm like, I don't know about mom. It took 18 months, but it didn't happen. It wasn't that far off. But I remember spending more time with her, going to her doctor's appointments, being an advocate, because I knew how to be an advocate. I knew how to listen. I knew how to be with her without forcing her to do anything. Like if she chose not to take all the medication, that was her business. If she said, like at one point after the heart attack, it was the heart attack that did her in. Well, that was the beginning of the end. That was in March, and she died in June, right? It was June. No, July. It
July.
was July. And I can remember learning from dad, like, I got to go to her doctor's appointments. You and I have to stay connected. I have to be with her more often. And I mean, I wanted to do those things. And I remember being very mindful that hospice was a real option and to step in way sooner. And even though you were the executor, I was the one running the like stuff in the background because you didn't want her to know because she disowned me. But I knew it needed to be done because I'd just done it for dad and I'd learned it all. I'd learned
I
it all. I
remember
learned all the
mom.
stuff.
I remember you were helping her too with a lot of the paperwork, and I know she was grateful for that, because you learned a lot. And yeah, I mean, and mom's was different again because she was, and we would like sleep at her house, at our apartment, right, just on the floor,
Oh
with
yeah, there was
her.
a lot of
And
sleeping on the floor and having the cat come sit on us and all that business.
yes, and yeah, right. It was a very small apartment, 600 square feet or so,
Hmm.
and but she was in another room, and we could be there with her, and she loved it. Like it was the best gift I think we could give her, and dad is the kids coming together and being with them pretty much 24/7 for about 2 weeks, I think. Well, just
With
almost about
mom.
the whole
Well, with
time
dad
with
too.
mom.
Yeah, that's right.
With dad quite a bit, but we'd go back and I'd sleep in my apartment because he was in that care facility, and we could get a little bit of rest. But yeah, and so with mom, then she was ready, and she wanted to go, and she was always in pain, and so she was ready for hospice and palliative care, um, and we. I think it was about 2 weeks, and then she had passed. Correct?
Yeah, so I think what
About two.
happened, she was in hospice for a couple of months,
Was it
actually.
okay?
Yeah, so she'd had the heart attack and mom kept saying, I don't want to go back I never want to go back to the hospital again. And she said that shit all the time. Oops, that stuff all the time. Uh,
You can
oops.
swear. Yeah, she
Um,
said it a lot, and she also had helpers come in, and she wasn't always easy to help. So
that's
we had
that's
to
very
manage that as
generous.
well. We had to
Well,
manage that as well.
there was a lot of managing what was going on with mom. She did make things as hard as they could possibly be, I guess half the time. But there was like after she'd had the heart attack and she had gotten out of the hospital, and that was during COVID because there was still lockdown, right? We were just
No, remember she
that
broke her hip, and
we couldn't
she
see
also
her.
broke her hip during COVID.
I know we had to go and bring her things and drop it off at the station with a mask on and go, okay, this is for mom. She was like there for 4 weeks or something. She couldn't see anybody. Anyway, so I remember her having the heart attack and then um, her really serious about not wanting to go to the doctor anymore. Like she's done. And you could tell she was done. And I remember then talking to her doctor. You and I got on a video call with her doctor and said, look, mom doesn't want any more intervention. And I think it's time. like she'd benefit greatly from hospice because they can come in and take care of her and give her palliative care in a way that she just isn't going to get otherwise. And the doctor didn't need any convincing. She's like, she could.
Yeah, when I look back on the doctors who were kind of tentative about telling us the situation, that once we brought it up, they seemed to all be all in. They're like, "Yep," it's like we almost had to come to our own conclusion on it, and so we did come to that conclusion and found the best hospice organization with the best people,
They were
and
so good.
they were so good. And then and it kind of like so we were there with mom and with dad. I was, it was funny because I was next to him when he passed away, and that was my dream, was to, and I don't mean that like yay, but I wanted to be next to dad when he passed away because he was near me, and mom was so far away. I didn't think I'd have that opportunity, but if I could have that, that is what I desired. And so I was next to dad when he literally passed. You and I were with mom the whole time until we just stepped out to take a breath, and she passed. So we're not very far. We're virtually next to her, or
We'd been
very
by
close
her
to her.
side for 11 days. Like when she slipped, so it was the UTI that took her down, which is really common. Having a UTI will take an old person out really fast, and she could not bounce back from that UTI, and she just declined. And as she declined and started her slow passage out, I remember us just being there. Like I didn't go home. I didn't even go home. You didn't go home. I think you might have had to go home once to go get some clothes or something. No, you stayed. It was us. It was 11 days. I didn't go. I had my husband bring me clothes and underwear. Like I need to wear something besides this one outfit that I brought because I didn't know I wasn't leaving. And it was the best experience ever to be of service to somebody who's passing away and to work with people, like to be with you through the process, through the really difficult emotions and all the things that were going on. I mean, and to do the work, I think, to make sure
It's
she
an
got her
honor to be.
medications and all that.
Yeah, to me, it was an honor to help somebody transition. As much as I don't want to believe that my dad's going to die or my mom's going to die at some point, it's a reality. Um, and it's an honor to be with them and comfort them. So I know not everybody gets that opportunity, and sometimes people live really far away. But if you do get the opportunity, it's a beautiful thing. So, and I think we both agree on that, and we both are super appreciative of each other and the support of of your husband Chris. And I was dating somebody, and they were supportive too. So it was kind of nice to just have that, and
Yeah.
and so we lost our parents within a year and a half of each other, and it was and we we're processing. And the other topics I wanted to talk about was grieving, because it was like during COVID when this happened, and so it's not like it was awkward and we had to like figure stuff out and be with them. And luckily we were able to be with dad just before COVID hit, and mom kind of um a year into COVID, because she was at her own place. I guess we could do it, but I mean we were uh, yeah, that it was a weird moment. But and then services. I mean, let me ask you though. I mean, as we go into like my topic here is grieving. I feel like I was shell shocked a little bit because I also in between had tumors removed from my stomach. Right? It's like, okay, great. It's like I'm dealing with. I don't know if you had much going on at the time. I'm sure you did, but like I think I'm still kind of unwinding from it several years later. How are you doing?
Great. I feel so at peace. When mom died and we did all the things, I just felt at peace. I'm so surprised. Have I processed different? Do I miss them? Yes. There are days when I'm like, oh, I'm going to call mom and tell her this thing. Or, God, I wish I could share this with dad. I mean, I'm not crushed by it all, but I miss them. but I don't think, I think spending time with them when they were dying, like they were sick and we were of service and we were showing up and we got to spend time. I recorded their stories. I mean, it was clear what was going on. That I showed up, and it was my way of processing in the moment, and I feel complete. I never had that feeling of incompletion with them, but I worked it out with mom while she was alive. You know what I mean? Like, it was ugly sometimes, but we worked it out. And I feel at peace about that too. And so I didn't have a hard time with the processing. I know it's been a little different for you because you had different relationships with them, completely different than I did.
I would
And
say I agree with you on the process. Like being with them helped with the grieving process for sure. Like there was a completion to it. There was like I felt I was proud of myself for doing it, and I felt very good that you and I could bond more, and we could bond with the parents, and be there with them as they passed. And like one of the things, like I would just say for me with my relationship with them, two things. One is I never had gone to a medium before, and I know people are like, that's crazy, because I talked to some of my guy friends, are like, never do that. It was so healing for me. If you go to a good one and they come through, it's all love. And the mediums that I went to, I could tell they knew more than, like, they didn't go to my Facebook page and go, oh, I know this thing and I'm going to say it. I could tell something else was going on, and it was beautiful. So yeah, doing the mediumship was super helpful. The services were important too, because at
yeah,
some point I said, Laura, we need to bury dad, because it was in COVID and we kind of had to wait for a while. And his ashes were in my apartment, and I'm like, it's time. I can tell it's time. And so those services were very helpful in processing too, I thought. Um, right? I mean, and they weren't huge. Mom's was pretty small and dad's was a little bit bigger, but just having those services was also a nice little capper on it, I think.
well, dad's service was like, it was March 8th, and we had lockdown 3 days later. I remember because we did a kind of a big deal for dad, like, because he was an artist. And so we did an art show, invited all the family. And there were people who didn't come because they didn't feel well. And nobody really, like, COVID wasn't a thing yet. It was talked about in the news, but it wasn't like, it wasn't a thing yet, you know? Like, when people were like, I'm like, I totally respect the idea that if you're not well, don't come. I understand that. I didn't diss anybody for that. But it didn't occur to me that anybody had COVID, you know. And one of our friends
But they
died of
did.
COVID the next week, who was
That's
supposed to
right.
be at the thing. So it was right
Yeah,
before the
and
lockdown. And then we buried dad the following year, I think.
it was a while ago. Yeah, that's when I said, yeah. So there was the service with everybody, and then there was the burial. I guess that's what took so long, and that I knew that
Yeah.
aspect needed to happen. With mom, we kind of did hers. Hers was just really a burial. I don't think we did a like a public service. I don't think she wanted one.
No,
But it was COVID, and we couldn't really. There wasn't much to do, and we
we
did the
waited.
the
We
burial
waited on
the
that
burial
too.
at sea. We did a burial at sea. So
We sprinkled her
the
ashes.
other
I want to
thing,
be really clear. That's what we did. We didn't just drop her body into the
yeah, we got
ocean.
we got a permit. I like to say that because we did, and we got an O'Neill catamaran and went out on the
Monterey
Santa Cruz
Bay.
Bay, Monterey Bay. Thank you, off of from Santa Cruz,
It was
and
beautiful. It was really
that was
great.
incredible. It was incredible. The other thing I'll just add too for me is I've had PTSD. I'm just going to say, for after the parents died, because I was worried about them so much over the several years before they passed away. I have dreams of they're still alive and they're suffering, and I'm like, and I
Mm.
wake up going, oh my god. And one time it was one of those inception things where I woke up and I thought I was awake, but I was still in my dream, and I woke up again, and I'm like, wow. So I mean, it takes time to process these things, even though I do feel like there is a completion. It's never complete, and we miss mom and dad, and I think about them a lot. But I do feel like they're with me energetically in a more in where they feel healthy and happy. That's how I kind of think about it. Like they feel better. They left us behind. Thanks a lot. Just kidding.
That's what happens. That's how the whole journey of life works.
It's how it works. And let me ask you, like I said, I know this is going to be a little bit longer, but we're almost going to wrap here in a little bit. But I want to, ask you what your favorite moments were with dad and what your favorite moments were with mom towards the end.
Um, I remember with dad that Chris had, so dad had this really old mandolin, really old. I think it was granddad's. And Chris had it refurbished. And Chris was really excited about showing dad the mandolin. So we brought the mandolin, and Chris has been playing, like a guitar
While
and a
he was
bass
at
and stuff.
Plumtree service, while he
Yeah.
was in, right?
Yeah. So he was in Plumtree. Yeah. So he was in he was still lucid before he slipped
Almost
into a coma.
hospice.
Almost hospice, not quite, but it wasn't too, it was like a week before he died, or, it wasn't very long before he died. But Chris brought in the mandolin and started playing, and dad, like, he was all doped up from morphine, but I can remember him, like, just like having a sweet smile on his face about, like, there it is, there's the mandolin the way I always dreamed it would be. And and that Chris did it for him. So there was this like connection because they liked each other. It was really nice. But it was just a sweet moment to witness that dad got to
Yeah, and
see.
I'm with you. Like for me with dad, it was uh, so he was in Plumtree, the care facility, and it's before hospice. And he was in one area where he had a curtain between two people. I forgot, maybe he just had a procedure or something. And he was on the far end, so he's on the other side of the curtain when we walked in. And you and I don't think we didn't call him and say we're coming in, although we had been coming in quite a bit. But it'd been a minute, like maybe it was the 2 o'clock that day, and we hadn't seen him since yesterday, the day before. We walk in, and we're at the foot of his bed, and he sees us. His eyes light up, and his arms open wide, and he's just like, "My kids!" I had never seen him light up like that before. And you and I, because we have different lives at that point, we didn't normally show up always at the same time. But just watching him light up, going, "My kids are here," and beaming love was just that is in what do you say, burned into my memory. So that was just beautiful.
Yeah,
What about
it was
mom
really
for
good.
you? What moment do you remember, kind of like maybe the last moments do you remember?
I remember, so Amy came. So Amy, being my oldest child, um, flew up from LA, and she's like, I got to be there for Nana. And watching Amy with my mom and holding hands, and mom was completely out of it, but she would squeeze Amy's hand, and Amy leaning over and telling her how much she loves her. Um, that was such a beautiful moment. And just being able to be with her that way, that to me, and mom, I'd already had a conversation with mom, just telling her how much I loved her and that everything is okay between us. That no matter what happened in the past, it's all gone, and I love you, and it's okay to go whenever you're ready. I'm here for you, and I'm not going anywhere. And those two things for me are some of the most important experiences of my life.
Mm, that's beautiful. Yeah, for me, I don't know if it was one thing, but I do remember mom, and granted she was on pain medication or strong pain medication, but at some point she got really euphoric and said, all there is love, all there is love, all there is love. And she had been in so much pain her whole life, mentally and physically. She had her uterus removed, she had her breasts removed from breast cancer, she and lymph nodes removed, and she had fibromyalgia, and she had headaches and heart attacks and broken bones and
Hip
things,
replacements.
uh,
She had 3 hip
hip
replacements.
replacements. And I've never seen her like that. She looked like she was very light and very, like, just like kind of what she needed her whole life, that moment. And to see her like that, at least towards the end, giving her some peace and some joy, was just beautiful for me.
Yeah.
So,
She
yay, we
loved
got
you.
yeah, a little bit of, yeah, it's emotional. Let's go over, for anybody who's still with us, the administrative side of dying. Whether it's, and I got a whole list here that I can go over, and maybe you can just touch on a few things that stick out to you. We don't have to go into grave detail, um, but I will go into a little bit of detail, and if it jogs your memory on something, great. And then we'll talk about resources, and then we can wrap it up, like some resources that we suggest. But administrative side, like estate planning, is important, I think. And you got me to do estate planning, and I do want to make a distinction in my research that well, first of all, there's a revocable trust, or it's also called a living trust, or irrevocable, and most people go for revocable. And it says it's used to leave property when you die, and it gives you more privacy and allows you to separate the ownership of your property from the control of your property. This is helpful to facilitate transfer of assets after your death, and to ensure your assets can be managed in case you become incapacitated. Whereas irrevocable is like you basically give up control, and you have to go to the courts to get control back. So revocable trust is what most people do, or a living trust. And then there's a living will, or it's just called a will, which is a written legal document that spells out your medical treatments, in case you need some, you want to give somebody guidance on that. And then there's your healthcare directive, like whether it's tube feeding or organ donations. Um, and I have a note here: you don't need to have an advanced directive or living will to have a do not resuscitate or do not intubate, but you would need to work with your doctor on that, just as a heads up. And in some states, advanced healthcare planning includes a document called POLST, Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment, and I think the document, or it might be called MOLST, MOLST. Maybe it's medical orders, et cetera, et cetera. So there might be some other things to consider. Then there's durable power of attorney, which I think would be related to your will, where you're talking about medical instructions and having somebody be able to execute on those.
No,
So it's
durable
durable
power of
power of attorney.
attorney is a financial directive. The durable power of attorney allows you. So when dad was incapacitated,
Okay, I have durable power of attorney and medical power of attorney. So yes,
so they
sorry, go
do.
ahead.
So the durable power of attorney is when someone's alive and incapacitated, and the medical power of attorney is making medical decisions. So those can kind of be combined sometimes, and they happen while the person's alive. So there's a distinction. The post is while you're alive. The estate plan, whatever you're doing, whether it's a trust, whether it's a will, whatever you're putting together, all those things go into an estate plan. But some of it's while you're alive, and some of it's while after you've passed, after the person's passed. And
Yeah, and I might
so
have. Mm-hmm.
you kind of, thing is that what I would recommend people do is go get your estate planning figured out. Dad did it. He did it
And it's
years
not cheap.
before.
It's
No,
not
it's not
cheap,
cheap, but it'll save you
it's
some.
worth it if you can afford it. And if you can't, maybe sometimes you can go to LegalZoom or something like that and try to cobble it together yourself. So I think
Well,
there
we
might
did that
be
for
that
mom. So we
possible.
went to Nolo Press for mom. So that's how I did it with mom. Mom didn't have any of her paperwork done ahead of time. And after dad and mom kept like getting sick, and I'm like, we're going to do this. And I did it for her. And we had somebody come in and notarize her documents, but we went through
That's right.
everything because it was very simple for her because she didn't have a lot. So she had a limited amount of stuff. So I wasn't super confident, but I'd been around the block a couple times by then. And so we made sure she had all of her legal documents in order so that estate could be handled without, I mean, there wasn't much, but there were no complications in her estate
Yeah, you don't
after
want
her
to have
death.
to go to court afterwards and then deal with that.
You do
It's
not.
better to get it taken care of.
It's
And I
a
do want to
big,
make a distinction.
yeah.
I think I said a living will was also called a will, but it's not. It's versus a will. A living will, like I mentioned, was the written legal document that spells out medical treatments, whereas um, a will or last will and testament will talk about. Um, it says to guide your loved ones and the courts about how your estate should be distributed. So, it can get confusing if somebody's talking about a living will versus a will or last will and testament. There's also perhaps HIPAA release form, final disposition instructions. So, you're going
So
to get buried.
I'll give you two pieces of information that help me. So mom, I knew what dad was really well organized before he died. And one of the things he went through his whole estate plan. They give you a binder when you do an estate plan. They generally give you a binder. So dad had a revocable trust, a living will, a durable power of attorney, and he also filled out a form called the 5 wishes. And it doesn't have to be notarized, but it can be notarized. And it asks you questions and you provide the answers. It's for each person to do personally about how you want your passing or your illness or whatever to go. And then what you want your service to be like what kind of music do you want? What kind of, like, do you want to be cremated? And even though this might be duplicated in your estate plan, it's a really easy document. If I didn't have that for mom and dad, I wouldn't have been sure about the things that I had to make decisions about when they couldn't make decisions for themselves. That one document was amazing. It's called the 5 wishes, and you can get it online. Just look it up, the 5 wishes. And it helped me so much, so much. I was glad that all the legal stuff was taken care of, but this one thing, like mom wanted to be buried at sea. And cremated, and dad wanted to be cremated, and he wanted, he didn't wasn't super specific about his um uh service, but he didn't want chemo, and he wrote it down on there: I do not want chemotherapy. And every time I had to make a decision because he couldn't make decisions for himself, I'm like, at least I know he doesn't want chemo, which means at this point
That's
there's nothing
helpful.
for us to do. And that
Yeah.
doesn't end up in the estate plan. That's his personal wishes. So anyway, I wanted to make sure I said that because it was critical in me having a clear conscience as I moved along, and I knew what direction to head into.
Totally. No, and I'm gonna. So I have some resources, and I'll put that in the show notes. That'll include a link to the 5 wishes worksheet. This one is from Hospice of, I don't know, Lenawi, whatever,
Yeah, I don't
somewhere
know
in the
either.
United States, but super helpful. The Mayo Clinic had there's a link that had some really good information, and there's a website called Trust and Will. So I'll include those.
And
Some other
don't
resources.
forget Nolo Press. Nolo Press was great. They really helped me with mom stuff.
Legal docs. Okay, I will put that in there. And the other resources, like, so I'm just going to read this list that you and I put together, and they'll be in the show notes. But books, for example, The 5 Invitations by Frank Ostaseski,
Yeah, I know
something
it's
like
hard to
that.
say.
Ostaseski, The 5 Invitations, and A Beginner's Guide to the End by B.J. Miller, M.D., and Shoshana Berger. There's something called The Last Lecture. That's a book, I believe, right, Laura?
Yeah, that's a book by a guy who was dying, and the lessons he learned in his illness and his passing. Is a beautiful book.
And then there's Tuesdays with Maury. That's an old one, which is
That's
a sweet
very
book about a
similar.
guy who befriends an older guy, yeah, in like a nursing home or something. It was pretty sweet. And then for me, one thing that got me more comfortable with death and dying was I watched a lot of videos and read books on near-death experiences where somebody would die, and then they would like be legally or technically dead, heartbeat gone, and their body left. And they said that experience was more realistic than the experience here. You'd have to watch a couple of these to understand what I'm talking about. But if you're curious about those, two really big ones are Anita Morjani, And you can watch her interviewed on YouTube. And she also wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. She had stage
So
4
good.
cancer, she died and came back, and she healed her. Somehow she got healed, but she had more experience than just that. And then a woman named Nancy Rhines, who was an atheist, and she had a near-death experience, and she wrote a book called Awakening from the Light. And she also has some interviews. If you want to try to get more comfortable with death and dying, those are helpful. And then also some people use plant medicine therapy. If people that are in hospice or facing a terminal illness, sometimes psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, can help with a therapist if within processing. And um, and there's also the series on plant medicines by Michael Pollan. It was on Netflix, and it's called Change Your Mind. It's also a book. It's actually a book originally. If you're curious about using plant medicines and psychedelics to cope with uh, death and dying and terminal illness and things like that. So I'm going to put those in the show notes. Laura, thank you so much. I
Bro.
know we covered a heck of a lot
Phew.
today. There's probably more to cover. Are there any last words, parting words for the audience?
Yeah. Love your people. Don't try and control them. Don't try and know better. It's their journey. When you show up with love, everything works out the way it's meant to work out. You can't stop life from happening. Be there with
Yes.
love.
I would say too, it's like we talked about forgiveness and not meaning it's okay that whatever somebody did to me is making it okay. But if you can let go of that emotion and just be with somebody and let them be themselves, if you can, because everybody's different, and sometimes some people are really difficult, and if somebody's going through, somebody's declining mentally and they're being mean or something and they don't mean to be, oh, my heart goes out to you. But forgiveness is healing for yourself, and it's healing for the relationship. But I'd also say take care of yourself as best you can. Take care of yourself. We did you did a 1 year diet, I guess, or food alteration where you lost like 80 pounds and felt fantastic mentally and physically. And I followed suit. And I did it for 6 months just before Dad went into hospice. That's when I ended my cleansing of my body. And it turned out to be, I think it was meant to be for me to like, I lost some weight, felt really good mentally, no sugar, no flour, no alcohol, organic foods, and whatever pasture, grass-fed meat and things like that. If we were going to do meat, so we were able to take care of ourselves in that capacity. And then anything you can do to just mentally take care of yourself, regardless of whether you have somebody in a difficult state, it helps. It helped me show up so much stronger and so much
Hmm.
more centered, and with so much more composure, that I
Yeah.
just am grateful for taking care of myself.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. It made a huge difference. I understood how to be present in a way that before I had done I'd done all the work, but the food too made a, I don't know, I showed up in a different way as a better person for sure.
Yeah.
I
Well, Lauren
think.
Monack, my favorite sibling. Thank you for being my guest on Breakthrough Souls.
I love you, bro. Thank you.